Right, now we're going to show the past continuous tense, right? And the form is quite simple. So I am sleeping. Now, past, I was sleeping. So you use the past tense of to be as an auxiliary verb. We're going to listen to the first stanza of a country song by John Anderson. And in the song, he's singing about his girlfriend, Charlie Johnson. And he goes over to see Charlie. And in Charlie's house, her mother, her father, and her brother are doing various things. So when John goes over the house, there are three actions in which the past continuous can be used, and then afterwards, John and Charlie, his girlfriend, are also doing something, right? So listen to, and it was a big hit for John Anderson, and it's called Swinging.
Chocolate pie. Mama was in the kitchen cutting chicken up to fry. Daddy was in the backyard rolling up a garden hose. I was on the porch with Charlotte feeling up down to my toes, and we were swinging. Yes, we were swinging. Little Charlotte, she's as pretty as the angels when they sing. I can't believe I'm out here on her front porch in the swing, just a swinging. Yeah, we'll be swinging. Yes, we'll be swinging. Little Charlotte, she's as pretty as the angels when they sing. I can't believe I'm out here on the front porch in the swing, just a swinging.
So now we come to the thematic segment, and this time we've chosen rock and roll music. Now, most of you are too young to remember early rock and roll. I'm 80 years old, so I was a teenager when this great, exciting music was coming out, and my generation will never really forget those singers. That music, and everything's on YouTube now. It's all coming back, so that is a wonderful gift, I think, that YouTube has given to my generation. So, but I'm also using it as a reinforcement of the continuous tenses, so it's not just chosen at random. But let me just go back to a very simple history of rock and roll. Now, I remember, my wife is Indonesian, and she tells me about the early rock and roll singers who were popular in Indonesia. Connie Francis, I believe, was very popular. There was even an Indonesian Connie Francis. Cliff Richard was popular, and the Shadows. Elvis, of course, the Everly Brothers. There were Fauzi and Fauzan, I think, who also did an Everly Brothers revival tribute act. But singers like Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent, they weren't so popular here. Eddie Cochran, I'm surprised. I think it had something to do with the record distribution, the marketing, if you like, the capitalism all over the world, where certain areas of the world were targeted, and they had distributors. I remember I was in Iran and I saw Cliff Richard albums on sale. This was in the 60s. But other parts of the world did not promote these singers. By the way, this is an aside, Indonesia made a very interesting contribution to early rock and roll with Indo-rock, with groups like Andy Thielman, the Thielman Brothers, and lots of others. And for political reasons, they had to be, they were exiled to the Netherlands. We won't go into the politics of that, but certainly Indonesia should be proud, really proud of people like Andy Thielman, who was an amazing guitarist. He was playing his guitar behind his back years before Jimi Hendrix. He had a 3 octave vocal range, and there were some great artists there. But let's go back to the mainstream early rock and roll. Now, the first rock and roll record, there's been a lot of debate on this, but it's generally considered to be Rocket 88 by Ike Turner and Jackie Branson and his Rhythm Kings. So if that's the main contender for the first rock and roll record, and that was in 1951, Rocket 88. However, for example, Fats Domino had a song called The Fat Man, which was even earlier, and then we had people like Joe Turner, and then Bill Haley. Bill Haley had a song called Crazy Man Crazy. That was 1953. And then his big hit, which was in 1954, became very, very popular in 1956, was Rock Around the Clock, which is probably the most iconic early rock and roll song. Now, the first rock and roll singer, who was the first rock and roll singer? Well, a lot of people say Bill Haley, Elvis Presley. Gene Vincent was one of the early rock and roll singers. He wasn't very popular. He wasn't so popular in Indonesia, but he was one of the pioneering early rock and roll singers. And he was asked who was the first rock and roll singer, and this is what he said. Carl Perkins was the first rock and roll singer. Carl Perkins. He says, even Elvis, if you ask him, he'll admit it. Bill Haley, if you ask him, will admit it. Carl Perkins. Now, again, not so popular in Indonesia. He was playing rock and roll about 1953. He was starting. He went to the famous Sun Records studio in Memphis, which Sam Phillips, this Juju man, the producer, he produced Elvis, and he'd already been playing rock and roll, and one of his most famous songs was Blue Suede Shoes, which Elvis also recorded, and then Carl Perkins, on his way to perform Blue Suede Shoes on national TV, had a car accident, terrible car accident. He was seriously injured. One of his brothers, I think, was killed, and so Elvis Presley's version got to the top, and so Carl, to some extent, became rather forgotten. But he had another great song called "Bop in the Blues." Bop in the Blues, again, present continuous tense. All my friends are bop in the blues, right? And